I read something today that absolutely blew my mind. Now, granted, it doesn't take a lot, you'll actually laugh when you hear it. But up until recent years in Japan, there was no distinct word for blue and for green. They just had the one word for the two colours. And pardon the pronunciation, I think it's ao. And I could not get my head around this. I was like, what? That's crazy. Bananas. I mean, sure, clearly they're two distinct colours. And then I thought about it a little bit more and realised that that's just my concept of what blue and green are. Now, granted, that's possibly a bad example because obviously there's a lot more than me who clearly see blue and green as being very distinctive and requiring two descriptions. But it is very reflective of the way in which I talk about the importance of understanding your worldview and the possibility that it's not always 100% accurate. I suppose the way in which we interpret the world and ourselves and other people is very much based on a whole pile of variables, our past experiences, particularly if they're trauma informed, our self-limiting beliefs. These are, I suppose, the beliefs that we have about ourselves, about other people, that are based on criticisms that we may have received at some stage and that we've internalized. The stories and the constructs that we've created about the world around us, and the biases that are at work in our minds in order to help us lower our cognitive load, but which can oftentimes filter out information which is really, really important. Our concept of who we are, our core values, our core beliefs, our desire to see things the way that we want to see them, to find evidence for what it is that we want to believe. And it's amazing, you have all of these things working to create a version of events. And the more you can be aware of the fact that all of these things have a role to play, as opposed to just taking everything that you think at face value, the more likely you are to be more rational as opposed to being reactive, and the more capable you will be of challenging some of the things that cause you to react, that cause you to feel pain, that cause you to be triggered, or that make you feel badly about yourself or your life. And I found this so much in my own circumstance. And again, I could be like, maybe applying the imagination a little too much, but when somebody does something that really hurts me, my initial reaction, and God knows I'm easily hurt, is to really, really struggle with it, and to make it very personal and to make it very catastrophic, So basically, it's the worst thing in the world, and it's so painful, and I don't know how I'm going to get over this. And one tool that I have found really helpful is changing the story. And that's basically understanding that, yes, it's hurt, and accepting that it is a reality. What has occurred. But changing the reason that it may have occurred. And generally what this involves me doing is looking at the person who has hurt me or who has offended me in some way, and basically seeing them as a person just like me who struggles just like me, and for whatever reason their behavior may potentially be the consequence of some level of suffering or some level of rejection or some level of pain. And it just makes life so much easier because it helps me to feel compassion for the other person. It also alleviates some of my suffering. And, again, as I said, it's very creative. You're basically just telling yourself a story. And what I do find is you may not just get away with telling yourself the story once. You may have to tell yourself the same story, shuffle it up again, regurgitate it over and over again, every time that trigger crops up, but keep doing it, and every time you do it, there's a little bit less of a sting, because the more you're able to pause in between the emotional response, the thoughts, the behaviors that you feel like reverting to, the more you'll be able to slow things down, the more you'll be able to ease your own suffering and make wiser decisions, the more you'll be able to question your interpretation of events and your role in other people's lives. Because when you slow things down, when you take a breath, you kind of diffuse things a little bit as well, you know, as opposed to everything moving at this crazy fast pace. And I think the most beneficial times you need to be able to do this is when you feel very scared, when you feel angry, when you feel ashamed. However, if you practice it when you're in a good place, you're more likely to be able to apply it when you're in a very emotional state. So if you practice taking a pause, taking a breath throughout your day. So just say, for example, you feel hungry, you go to the fridge, you just take a really deep breath, you have, you know, kind of a check-in with your thoughts, a check-in with your bodily experience, and then you decide, okay, what am I going to eat? And doing that, like, that's just a very straightforward example. But doing that as frequently as possible throughout your day is so helpful in helping you create those little spaces between your stimulus and your reaction and your response. And that's what it's all about. It's about not being as reactive. It's about not being at the mercy of every single thing that happens on a day-to-day basis. Challenging the way that you categorize the world, challenging the way that you think about the world, and challenging the way that you think about yourself. And it's hard because, again, as I said, a lot of this stuff, it's really convincing, and it's very hardwired. So challenging it takes sometimes a bit of help, it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of commitment, and the results aren't that quick and they're not that amazing, you know. It's slow work, it's tedious, but you do notice incremental, bit by bit, getting stronger at it, getting less reactive, experiencing a greater peace of mind, being able to let things go a little bit more, be more accepting of yourself, accepting of other people. And ultimately that means your connections, your relationships are so much better placed, because when you always take something personally, when you always feel like everything is about you, you don't stand a chance, you know. You're always going to be hurt by people. Whereas if you can kind of remove yourself, become more like a bird's eye observer of your life, your thoughts and your feelings, things are so much easier. It becomes so much more straightforward to get on with people, to forgive them for whatever they do, to forgive yourself for whatever you do, and to just get on with life. If this is something you'd like to get good at, or if you'd like to just find out a little bit more about how I can help you deal with any mental health issues you may be experiencing, or help you find a more fulfilled way of living, get in touch with me on my website. It's fundamentals.ie.